So there's a bit of a competition for the Ignores Line of Sight crown in the Space Marine Codex. Let's take a look at how the Whirlwind and the Thunderfire cannon stack up against each other. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, the strategy-focused 40k channel where we're all about trying to get the most out of every unit on the battlefield. We've taken a look at quite a lot of the units from the Codex now, so I think that we can start drawing some comparisons and seeing which units are better for which particular battlefield roles. With that in mind, I thought I'd take a look at the Ignores Line of Sight weapons available to us. Ignores Line of Sight is a very important consideration to have in a competitive game of 40k, particularly if you're using rules such as the ITC's terrain rules, where the bottom floor of ruins always blocks line of sight. I quite like the rule personally, and it means that you have a fair few more tactical options due to being able to hide units rather than just most people being able to see each other and having a straight up shooting fest. Even if you're not playing with those rules, however, being able to shoot anything on the battlefield, no matter how well hidden, is a really big bonus. Games can potentially be won or lost, depending on whether you can kill the one enemy infantry model that is camping on an objective all the way at the back of their lines when it gets to the end of the game, or just plinking off the last wound or two from a very dangerous unit that you otherwise wouldn't be able to touch. With this in mind, I've lined up a bit of comparison math hammer to see the points efficiency of the Thunderfire cannon, the regular Whirlwind with both its missile options, and the Relic Whirlwind Scorpius from the Forge World Index. Let's establish some basic rules for the contest first. Obviously no math hammer is going to be actually representative of exactly what these units do on the battlefield, but we can try and make it as close as possible. So firstly, we're going to have each of these units firing in Devastator Doctrine, as that's the doctrine that benefits them all the most. We're not going to be using any external buffs at all, not HQs, not stratagems, no psychic powers, and no chapter traits or combat doctrines. I'll have a little bit of a chat about these external factors after the math hammer, but for the basis of the main contest we're going to ignore them. Our four contenders are going to be a Thunderfire cannon, a Whirlwind with Vengeance missiles and no upgrades, a Whirlwind with Castellon missiles and no upgrades, and the Relic Whirlwind Scorpius from the Forge World Index, again with no upgrades. We'll be assuming the Relic Scorpius is firing twice, as with that enormous range, you've got no real need to move it, particularly if you've set up properly. We're going to be looking at their points efficiency per 100 points spent on that type of unit, because obviously we'd expect the more expensive units to do more work for the investment. We'll look at their points efficiency against killing a few units of different toughnesses. So without further ado, take your aim and fire. So the targets I've chosen to look at are these. Firstly, we have three types of infantry: Guardsmen, Tactical Marines, Primaris Marines. We'll be assuming that all of these are in cover, cowering on an objective somewhere. I'm sorry, we seem to be turning our guns on fellow Imperium units. Maybe we should have included some Chaos or Filthy Xenos instead, but oh well, it's a bit late for that. And finally, we have a Toughness 7 vehicle with a 3-up save that isn't in cover, as the vehicle might not be able to be out of line of sight as easily, and unless it is actually towing in cover, then it won't be getting a cover save anyway. So let's take a look at the Guardsmen first, and we have a clear winner for the Thunderfire cannon here. The Thunderfire cannon wins in the direct points contest, and one Thunderfire cannon will typically kill 3.7 Guardsmen per turn. Next up we have the Castellon Whirlwind and the Relic Whirlwind Scorpius, both of which are reasonably decent competitors for their points costs, with the Castellan slightly winning out against these light armoured targets. Trailing behind we have the Whirlwind with Vengeance missiles, which as you'd expect is paying for some big strength 7 shooting, so it's not ever going to be quite as efficient against little guardsmen compared with the other units. Next, if we turn our attention to the Tactical Marine, so this guy will be in cover with a 2-up save, and this is a very big win for the Thunderfire cannon, far more so than against the Guardsmen. It does better against these guys because it wounds the Guardsmen just the same, as Toughness 5 is equally happy shooting Toughness 4 or Toughness 3. In second place we have the Relic Whirlwind Scorpius, which is significantly less efficient, but still puts in a good showing. You can expect one of these guys double shooting to kill 3 or 4 Space Marines a turn. The Vengeance and the Castellan Whirlwinds trail quite a bit behind these guys. The poor AP on the Castellan doesn't help in this case, and the Vengeance Whirlwind just doesn't have enough shots to compete with the others. If we move on to looking at Primaris Space Marines now, which we're beginning to see more and more in the meta, maybe something to do with all of these new Space Marine books, things flip round a bit. Nothing changes for the Thunderfire and Whirlwind Castellon, as they're only damage 1 weapons, but the 2 damage of the Vengeance Whirlwind and Relic Whirlwind Scorpius boost them up the rankings significantly. The Relic Scorpius is absolutely brutal at thinning out Primaris Marines, as it will kill them just as happily as it kills regular tactical Marines. The flat 2 damage of the Scorpius and the Vengeance Whirlwinds will also be helpful against things like Guard Mortars, Eldar Jet Bikes, and basically any other model with a flat 2 wounds. Despite this, the Thunderfire cannon does however still outcompete the Whirlwind Vengeance launcher, not by anywhere near as much, but by a little. The poor Castellon launcher is left completely in the dust compared with the others, due to the Primaris' high armour save and not doing multiple damage. Finally, we come on to the vehicle target, and the top 2 results are very close indeed. Both the Vengeance Whirlwind and the Relic Scorpius are almost the exact same in terms of damage output, if they feel the need to chip away at some tanks, with a very slight win for the Vengeance Whirlwind. If they were firing at a Toughness 6 or Toughness 8 vehicle, then the Relic Scorpius would win against the Vengeance Whirlwind however. The Thunderfire cannon isn't actually all that far behind, even against vehicles, and it would actually outcompete the Vengeance Whirlwind if they were firing against a Toughness 8 vehicle, say a Knight for example. Obviously vehicles aren't really the ideal target of any of these units, but I think it's quite important to consider the flexibility of these ignore line of sight units, as they could be the only thing that could kill a vehicle on its last couple of wounds, if you're worried that that vehicle might go on a wrecking spree in your opponent's next turn. So all in all, the Thunderfire cannon comes off very very well for its points across all targets. It's the strongest option against any single wound infantry with a toughness of less than 5, and still puts in a good showing against Primaris and tougher targets as well. It helps to highlight why quite so many Space Marine players are fielding these in multiples these days, never mind the additional utility that you can get from tremor shells. The Relic Scorpius also performs very decently against all targets too, not being so very far off the Thunderfire cannon when targeting single wound infantry, and outperforming it handily against anything tougher. It is a very solid investment for the points. The Castellon Whirlwind is only truly good against light infantry such as Guardsmen, maybe Tau Fire Warriors, or things like Demons which have an invul save where its lack of AP doesn't matter. It is a bit lackluster unfortunately when targeting anything with a decent save or decent toughness. And the Vengeance Whirlwind on the other hand is good against anything with decent save and toughness, but a bit lackluster against light infantry. So that's the core of the math hammer done. Let's talk about a few caveats and real world situations that will affect these different choices. Our first consideration is of course durability. Unlike the last math comparison I did, I'm not going to math out all the different durability for these units side by side, as I don't think it will be very meaningful. Most of these guys you can manage to block from line of sight, say hide some Thunderfire cannons in ruins, or hide whirlwinds behind buildings, things like that, but it is quite an important consideration. The whirlwinds aren't quite as good from a damage output point of view, but in terms of survivability, they're on a completely different level. For example, a Relic Whirlwind Scorpius isn't massively tougher than one Whirlwind, but has the price tag of almost 3. That means for the same points investment, you could be getting 33 wounds worth of vehicle, which is more than 20 wounds more than the Whirlwind Scorpius has. A lot of the time this might not necessarily come into effect, because you might be able to hide the Scorpius, but when you're facing things like Eldar Flyers that could swoop over and take out your tank, or if you're playing something like Guard who have an enormous amount of quality ignores line of sight firepower such as Basilisks, this could be a consideration. The Thunderfire cannon also has this issue. Toughness 6 2-up save and 4 wounds is a lot easier to get rid of than Toughness 7 and 11 wounds, particularly when the Thunderfire cannon costs more to begin with. Thunderfire cannons definitely have superior damage output, and if you get them to fire all game, then they'll certainly do you proud. But it's certainly a big concern if you did happen to match up against Eldar Flyers that could get line of sight on the Thunderfires, or Guards with a bunch of Basilisks, or even someone with a few Vengeance Whirlwinds on the other side of the table. Those Thunderfire cannons could be going down fairly rapidly. I think that this durability versus damage output trade-off means that all of these units are viable, and it just depends on how much you value the durability versus the increase in firepower. Let's have a look at a few other external options. Firstly, the Thunderfire cannon has an attached Tech Marine, which if his cannon does happen to be destroyed, then the Tech Marine can still potentially contribute towards the battle. He could go and repair other things, or just get stuck in close combat, which is quite nice. The Tech Marine could be a bit of a liability on the other hand, as if he does get sniped somehow, then you might lose your Thunderfire cannon for even less enemy firepower. Thunderfire cannons do have the Tremor Shells stratagem, which is very powerful against certain slower melee armies, and that's certainly a reasonable reason to have one in your army. Thunderfires and Whirlwinds can both fire twice with the 2 command point stratagem from the Space Marine book, and I believe that the Relic Scorpius Whirlwind can't do that anymore due to it losing the Whirlwind keyword in the official Forge World Index FAQ. I mean, it can still fire twice because of its special rule of remaining stationary, but it won't be able to fire a third time with that stratagem. The regular Whirlwinds have the option of taking a Storm Bolter, which is some very cheap additional firepower and should be considered, particularly as you don't really need to hide them out of line of sight as much as the other options because they're relatively tough. They also give you the option of a Hunter-Killer Missile, which is actually really quite a nice bonus if you're taking something like Master Artisans or the Salamander's trait. One positive for the Relic Scorpius is that it's a really big single unit, so could be a great target for certain buffs that affect one unit. Say if you have Torgaradon's Signum Array, then that could be a big buff to it, as it will be hitting on 2-up with a lot of shots. Also, any stratagem or psychic power that can target a vehicle like the Scorpius will have a lot more utility than when played on a Whirlwind or Thunderfire cannon, just because the size of the unit in terms of points is a lot bigger. Another consideration is mobility. The Whirlwinds are all able to move fairly decently and the Thunderfire cannon is static. It's not always going to make the biggest difference, but if they do need to come and sneak out to capture some objectives or potentially charge and tie up some enemy heavy hitters to prevent them from running rampage through your lines, then this is an option that the Whirlwinds have but the Thunderfire doesn't. Particularly the Iron Hands could make good use of this with the Whirlwinds, as they can be zooming around the battlefield, either keeping out of trouble, capturing objectives, or just getting some line of sight to plink away with those Storm Bolters, all while having absolutely no loss of firepower from their Whirlwind launchers. Finally, the Imperial Fists trait is a really quite decent buff to any of these units. Being able to ignore cover is a really nice benefit, as a lot of these times these units will be wanting to clear out entrenched units in cover or on objectives. This most helps out the Castellon launcher as it has the lowest AP, but it's a nice buff on any of them. Also, their buff to damaging vehicles is a really nice buff to have on any of these as well. It makes them truly flexible anti-infantry and anti-tank killers. As the Thunderfire cannon is only damage 1, it has the biggest percentage gain from this, as it doubles its damage against vehicles. When you take this buff into account, the Thunderfire cannon actually goes to having the best damage efficiency against toughness 7 and toughness 8 vehicles, as doubling its damage very slightly pips the buff that the Fists Doctrine gets to the Vengeance Whirlwind and the Relic Scorpius. So that's another very good reason why we see a lot of Thunderfire cannons in Imperial Fists armies. They're very efficient against infantry, particularly those in cover, as they're not bad at all against killing vehicles of any description. This certainly isn't going to be an exhaustive list of all of the other factors when taking any of these units. There's so many chapters, options and edge cases that we could talk about that I could be going on rambling for a very long time, but I've tried to catch a few of the key considerations that you choose when fielding these guys in common builds. If there's anything else that you think that's important that I've missed, please leave it in the comments down below for discussion, as you might really help out other players, including myself. I've been quite enjoying making these little Math Hammer videos, and I'll certainly be looking to do some more in the future, so feel free to subscribe if you'd like to see more like this. I also have a Patreon. Making these videos takes a very long time, so any support you'd be willing to give will be absolutely amazing. As always, thanks for listening to an Auspex Tactics video, and I'll see you guys next time.